Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. My name is Chris Spangle. Thank you so much for being here on the program today. We're going to talk a little bit about lockdowns and the pandemic and everything that's gone on, and look back with a little hindsight with our friend Hawk Jensen of the SoundMind Creative Group. He is the producer of the forthcoming documentary series, Follow the Science, on lockdowns and liberty. And they are a new sponsor here on the program. So we want to thank them for sponsoring the We Are Libertarians podcast network. And thank you so much for being here, Hawk. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, of course. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, just heard you on Zuby's podcast, and we've had a couple conversations. I know that you've worked closely with Brian Nichols over at the Brian Nichols Show here on the We Are Libertarians podcast network, and he's recommended having you on. And let's start with what your project is at followthesciencefilm.com. What are you trying to put together, and what do you hope will come out of this project that you're working on and fundraising for?
Sure. Well, the project itself, Follow the Science on Lockdowns and Liberty, is a docuseries. I mean, we call it the film kind of in shorthand, but it's a docuseries, a 5-part series, in which I and a bunch of my colleagues, we're all LA-based filmmakers with deep careers, and we were about 6 months ago, we were looking at the continuation of the lockdowns. I just fast forward a little bit. Like, when the second I heard the term lockdown, I knew that had very little to do with the public health, and that we're stuck in lockdowns for quite some time. But we were watching it happen. We were watching the things unfold. And there was Tom Woods actually made a call out to his audience saying, what we really need is a very strong series. And one of the producers, I'm one of the producers and attached to direct the series, but one of the producers heard that and called a number of us and said, I think we should take this up. I think we should do this. And we were like, oh God, okay, that's a big, it was we were all like, a little soul searching on that one. But we're like, well, yeah, this is important. This is our profession. We know how to tell a really good story. And we wanted to understand what's going on. We're all curious filmmakers, but we have an appreciation of the scientific method as a form of conjecture and criticism. And we see it as an extension of a freedom of expression, and which is a core principle for all of us. And we just wanted to look at the data. We wanted to look at the narrative. We wanted to look at the policies, and we wanted to see if what they were claiming, if the science indeed justified the claims and the eventual policies, which then led to these enormously invasive lockdown measures that reached deeply into the private lives of all Americans and all the denizens of the world, frankly, and changed the fundamental the fabric of society. And we suspect. We're going to do some investigation here, but we suspect it was likely not worth it. So we want to look at we want to look at science as an institution and as a process, and we want to look at on one side, and we want to look at the human story and the human suffering on the other side, and really do a true, not a hot button issue presentation. We want to sort of establish a cultural literate understanding of what occurred, because we all went through it, so we can all kind of reflect back like a retrospective. So that's the series. Yeah,
which I think is smart, because that's the only way to really, as a content creator myself, it's been near impossible to even have a conversation about it over the last 18 months, but especially the last years, people have just kind of become hardened in their positions. Sure. Like you're not changing a lot of minds, but I think, once the heat kind of passes of this moment and people can look back and reflect, sort of like 9/11, I think, where if revisiting 9/11 at the 20th anniversary, you kind of look back and you go, man, I remember feeling this way. But when you look back at that moment and take the emotion out of it, what were we thinking? Or I got that right, I got that wrong. I think it's a smart move, because going back and looking at what happened and the results, I think is very smart, because it's very clear that this is going to be, here in Indianapolis, we said time and time again, don't pass the smoking ban and outlaw smoking in restaurants, in bars specifically, because the mechanisms that you're going to build in doing this will be used for future events. Yeah. And this was the first time that they activated all of those smoking ban policies, was the pandemic. We were right about that. And, they've really used this opportunity to build new mechanisms. We've maintained here on the Chris Spangle Show that there's a difference between personal action to keep yourself safe, that from the beginning, I wonder, kind of where you were at in the beginning. I'll tell you where I was, just so we can kind of, let people know what your first instincts were. Mine was, oh, this isn't serious. We even did an episode, and I'm like, this is no big deal. Then I heard Michael Osterholm on Joe Rogan, and I was like, this sounds really bad, actually. Let's start taking this seriously, because they're definitely going to try and shut us down. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it was everybody was like, let's kind of take a couple weeks, figure out what's going on, and then readjust. The NCAA shut down here in Indianapolis. Businesses were doing, the right thing at that moment, shutting down, adjusting for what was right for them and their employees. And then Trump passes the CDC, restrictions, and then it was off to the races. I mean, mm-hmm. there's a distinct change in people's attitudes towards the pandemic and what they ought to do and ought not to do once the government got involved. And what I've always tried to say is, like, there's a big difference between a government lockdown and what's right for you and your family and the people around you, and how to handle that kind of stuff. And that nuance seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the way. I mean, it was very clear from the beginning that it wasn't going to be 2 weeks that they were going to pass these emergency laws. And that it would become a long-standing thing as it has. I know that you kind of had a similar reaction in the beginning, but where were you at in the beginning of this?
Well, I mean, a lot of wonderful points you made there. One of the things I tell myself, just to kind of keep in perspective, is that because it's hard to this whole thing is like a mass trauma that we've all experienced, but you have to remember that everyone you've ever met and everywhere you've ever been also had to deal with this. Yeah. Everyone had their own personal experience, and yet that experience made everyone feel isolated. So it's interesting where it's like this big, giant collective experience, and yet the isolation, it made us all feel isolated. And to your point about mechanisms, I felt that the mechanisms were prepared for that type of psychological reaction and sort of pounced on it. And that kind of sets up for my perspective. I mean, I've been sort of trying on different handles, but I've been a dissident artist for about 10 years. I mean, I've been looking at what it is actually to be a dissident, and finding the stories that no one wants to talk about. Now, specifically, I mean, I worked in Hollywood, I worked in LA, I worked in the mainstream, and I have this natural sort of, I always just sort of look for what people aren't saying. And I always kind of look to the shadows. What are the stories people talk about, and what are the stories they don't talk about? And I got to Los Angeles, and I mean, I've always kind of been a champion of the underdog, but I was like, well, why aren't we allowed to talk about communism? Like, what's wrong with just talking about it and criticizing it as an ideology as any other? And as such, I actually ended up doing this series called Witness Project for a group called the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, VOC. And I got to work with dissidents for the last 10 years and learning how they work and learning how they function. And it gave me an amazing perspective of what it is to be, and that just happened to be the ideology of communism, but what it is to be a dissident, someone who has the desire to express themselves within an oppressive society, normally a state oppression, but any oppressive society, and what it is to do that and what that usually looks like. And I was kind of ensconced in that. And then this virus comes along. And I've been watching, there was like the swine flu and the H1N1 and all these sort of weird attempts to have this virus, like the news response you'd hear about in like Southeast Asia was always this giant, like, well, here it comes. And they sort of prepare us if this is this giant thing. And most people didn't even pay attention. But it always felt they were trying to pull something off. This comes along, the virus comes along, all the nations, like seemingly overnight, kind of fell in line with like, okay, this is really bad. And I just had all these, per my experience working with dissidents, an understanding of what are the way markers of an authoritarian regime trying to seize control. And I turned to my colleagues and friends at the time, like, if they do this, this, and this, we know it's an authoritarian grab. And like literally that week's like, so we're gonna do these things called lockdowns for this trumped up righteous cause, because like, our hospitals might overflow, and all these sort of somewhat reasonable things that sort of the reasonable person might be like, well, that sounds all right. But I was on high alert from the get-go. I was just like, this is an authoritarian grab. And I just, I did focus on my own family and my own world during it, but I was just kind of kept talking to my immediate sphere going, I just really am concerned that lockdowns are not going away after 2 weeks. They're not going to go away after 2 months. We're looking at least 2 years, and that's the way authoritarian regimes work. They have a well-honed mechanism. Your site for mechanism, I think your audience, I think the libertarian crowd in general, and the free thinkers and the freedom thinkers tend to think about the mechanism, and you want to talk about the mechanism, but then everybody always can push back like, oh, well, you're not taking the virus seriously, and the death is like, no, it's not the details, it's the mechanism.
Exactly.
Right? It's not the message moving through the system. It's the system itself that we're trying to criticize. And they always just they throw back in your face as if you're criticizing the message. And I feel that this whole lockdown really got there,
Yeah. Like you take something like the vaccine passport idea or Joe Biden's, I apologize to you and the listeners. I'm fighting laryngitis again. But it isn't the fact, like if you oppose using OSHA to punish businesses over 100 employees because their employees are not vaccinated. If you criticize that, then you're anti-vax. Like literally, Merriam-Webster changed the changed the definition. I'm sure everybody listens.
The Orwellian
right
bellwethers are everywhere.
And and I don't know that we have done ourselves any favor as being critical, by kind of in the beginning, a lot of people adjacent to the libertarian world pushed a lot of like crazy shit. And I think that sort of, in the Christian world, it's like, you got to protect your witness. So you become across as credibility is an easily spendable capital in the attention economy. But, the reality is that you can be pro-vaccine and think that this is going to keep you from ending up in the ICU, but still oppose the mechanism of empowering OSHA to punish companies, because that's going to be used time and time again for any pet project.
Sure.
We just see this time and time again. Anybody with half a brain who knows anything about the government, the $600 in your Venmo account, that's only going to be used against rich people. Well, that's what they said about the income tax in 1913. Come on. So you see the mission creep. The mission creep is exactly right. Yeah. Always. So expanding emergency powers, here in Indiana, the legislature has sued the governor to remove those powers from Eric Holcomb's office because of what he did last year. I mean, so there's no doubt that this was going to be used aggressively. So is the film, like, when you go and put this together, and you've talked about 5 episodes so far, I mean, are you focusing on the government action? Are you focusing on like the science of the disease? Are you focusing on vaccines? Are you focusing on the big spending emergency packages? Like, are you going to do all of it? How do you start to piece this together as a story?
Well, initially we were thinking we were going to do a documentary, and then we realized that, it's an enormous issue, and we inflated the project into a docuseries so that we can incorporate all that. I mean, we primarily feel that we have a general sense that the top-down measures, that the sort of one-size-fits-all sort of edicts coming down, when we have this amazing, robust economy of amazing thinkers, across the board, scientists, entrepreneurs, and just everyday people who are figuring out how to deal with this. I mean, if you just sort of reduce it, a particularly bad flu came through. I mean, it was a slightly different variation of it, but it was like, there was an uptick in terms of its danger, but for a very targeted group. And absolutely, we could, like, if we had said, all right, if the leadership said, all right, everybody, we need to figure out how to do this. Everyone, we're going to figure it out. Here's our recommendations how you might go about it. And then let the petri dish of all the different states and all the different counties and all the different households, like, figuring out how to have functioned it and protected the vulnerable, protected the elderly, protected those with comorbidities. And then how do we go about, keep going forward? And we just we feel that looking at these top-down measures that just made these arbitrary decisions that with this weird claim of science. I mean, to follow the science. I mean, we talk about one of the things we talk about, like, well, what does that really mean? It's like, follow the silence, follow the compliance, do what you are told. I mean, those are the types of things that people who see and hear through these things, tell us, and we hear it ourselves. And so we want to look at that aspect from the government, and then the nature of the policy and the bureaucracy. Then looking at science as what is science, as I was talking about before. We speak we speak with Nick Hudson of Panda. He's the chairman of Panda, pandata.org, which is a great coalition of scientists and brilliant minds that based out of South Africa, and have chapters in 30 countries. But they're looking at they're basically an alternative scientific community that are trying to look at it without the interference of having to kowtow to like where the money comes from. I mean, like the money. The scientific institution as an institution is corrupt and has been corrupted for a long time. And the scientists are terrified to speak. I think they through bureaucratic pressure, fear of loss of their career and money sources, they have really lost the ability to criticize the conjectures as put forward. So we want to look at that. Like, what is science? We want to have a basic understanding of what science is, how science works, how science then presents an idea to a society, and then how government in an ideal world would relate to that and then incorporate that to do policies. Not this weird rah, there's a paper that's in the news one day, and then we have a top policy member of the government say, well, per this, I've decided to make these massive changes. And then the next day the governor says, okay, you can no longer work. I mean, it's just, and boom, boom, boom. And you alluded to it before. I mean, there's court cases. I mean, most of these things happen. They're not allowed to do this per the system we have in place, right. But the bureaucracy moves so slow, and they're purposely moving it slow as to like try and get as much change as they can before the court systems actually push back.
No, it's exactly right. Yeah.
So there's that, and then also
let's pause there, because yeah, sure. I think you've hit on an interesting point. I think if you look at Fauci literally saying like don't wear a mask, don't buy masks. I mean, if you really paid attention in the beginning, like for the first like 4 weeks. I remember this British guy's YouTube channel. He was like some nurse practitioner who would, like write on a whiteboard and explain COVID to you and how this spread and how it worked. Mm. And he was just like a regular guy with a YouTube channel who had a lot of experience and some skill at math. And like almost everything that guy said happened. And it kind of made me feel much more comfortable, because I'm like, okay, this is like serious. I need to not stay away from my 85-year-old grandpa. I'm glad I'm not 330 anymore, because I had it last month, actually. I have no doubt that if I were 330 pounds, I would have died from it, versus 250, where I exercise and work out. And if you just got some basic information, you were fine. Your hoaxer friends in October would learn the thing you learned in April, and they were surprised, and you're like, what? And then the other people would just like take things, and you're like, you're banning beaches? Like, you can't go to a beach? Yeah. Like, yeah. I mean, it was just sort of like this weird thing that has gone on. I
saw someone out on a paddle board wearing a mask.
Right. Like, walking outside in a mask.
But just compliance, and has nothing to do with any sort of basic understanding of what the problem is.
Because it all got politicized, but sure. the politicization of data and the information that came out was, I think, the most egregious, because if you take something like the CDC and their recommendations, businesses just take that as gospel, because they can easily default to that. It's like a company going, well, we're not going to bring in IU Health to craft the best vaccine policy for our individual employees. We're just going to do whatever the CDC says, even if it doesn't make any sense for the unvaccinated to wear masks and the vaccinated to not wear masks. I'm just sitting here going, that doesn't make any sense. That's a scarlet letter. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. I think that's a great example of the CDC saying no masks. Okay, now everybody has to wear a mask. Now only half the people get to wear a mask. And it's just like, you get why people are skeptical of centralizing the decision-making power in one body. Yeah. When it's been so inconsistent.
Engaging the dynamo of human ingenuity is what that's what naturally happened anyway to those who were like trying. But then it was like the bureaucracy was almost in the way. I mean, I feel I'm a big believer in the human spirit, and then a bunch of those coming together and figuring out the best path forward, and then to recognize, and then to have like this grand sort of scientific, like the scientists come in, look at the data, and it's like, you know what, there's a group over here, they're doing something over here, and it seems to be working. Let's start looking at it, and let's try some variations on it. Like I would like to still see sort of a grand renaissance of science to reestablish our trust in the institution of science, but none of that happened, and this bureaucratic mess that I feel, it was very much not only, but it's very much at the feet of Fauci, who seems to just be more of an egoist, and a megalomaniac who wants everyone to think he's a great guy, which I guess is how I happen to see a little piece of his documentary, and that seems to be his, like, I just hope people think I'm an all right person, and I remember back, I'm old enough to remember the AIDS epidemic coming through, and it was very similar thing where the fear factor was such that if you went outside and touched anything, you might get AIDS.
I remember that.
Before even the idea of HIV was even presented. It was
like the idea that Magic Johnson would play basketball and accidentally touch his sweat would touch another player, they could get AIDS. Like, I mean, sure, basketball players and not wanting. I remember that as a kid. It was
and that was even kind of late in it, and because it was but I mean, Fauci was there, he was right where he was, he was in control then. And it's interesting because, like, if you go and start comparing that, I mean, he absolutely insisted that one drug from the pharmaceutical companies was the miracle drug, and that's the only one, and it's the only one they can take. And then the homosexual community was looking at their loved ones passing away. They were illegally trying different cocktails of all different sorts of drugs, found something that worked, and for 3 years Fauci blocked that, and like 30,000 people died. And then later he finally acquiesced, and they finally discovered like this modern cocktail that's become normalized, and it's something you can live with HIV/AIDS. It's perfectly fine. And part of what I've noticed that Fauci is doing is like rehabilitating his image. He's like, what's amazing about me is I actually listened to the activists. I actually listened to the homosexual community. I listened to what they had to say, and gosh, it changed everything, and I saved all those lives, which to me is a screaming indictment that he knows that those 30,000 individuals who died during that time could have been saved if the grassroots knowledge was percolated up into the science, so it could confirm it through that dynamo of ingenuity of that is the American spirit, or the human spirit. But he just believes he's some sort of priestly class, giver and taker of what we must do, and I think it's indicative. And here we are now. It's like only the pharmaceutical companies. There's this bizarre relationship. It's something like that. Those are the types of things I've been investigating to try and find, like, what's the pattern here? What's the pattern of this sort of, the way these corporations, these sort of weird sort of corporate socialists have been sort of conspiring with these top level, deep rooted bureaucrats to sort of control everybody. And it's outrageous. This country wasn't designed to function that way, and yet they seem to act with impunity right now.
So I mean, obviously the centralization of decision making is terrible. I would love for you guys, I don't know if you've ever read the New York Times, the Lost Month, basically about how the CDC and the FDA and the Trump administration, HHS, completely blew testing. Like, the only way that we were ever going to really get a handle on this in America was giving people information, giving them testing. I got COVID the first week of April last year, and a test was $900. Well, if I had better information, I would have made a lot better decisions probably the days leading up. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you really couldn't, you still to this day have a hard time getting a test. It can take 2 or 3 days for you to even get a test. I mean, that's a top gun to itself. I mean, the home kit, the blocking of the home kit.
We should have dirt cheap home kits available at every pharmacy that people have stocked up on, and it's like, oh, okay, let's get on top of this. I mean, there's something that just seemed deliberately held up. I mean, I also say, like, I have like sort of my strong personal opinions, and then I'm going to have my sort of the way we want to have this documentary unpack all these things.
Right.
But also even just like the way information's collected. We've learned quite a bit about that. I mean, each state, each county has a slightly different way of collecting data. And it's one thing to be aware of, like, the state doesn't consider something to exist until it's been reported to them. So, the hospitals have to report every so often. They reach out to the hospitals, say, okay, how many cases, how many people have died, what's the cause, is it COVID, things like that. But if they wait a week or two or three and don't call it because it wasn't routine, they would say, all right, well, send us the information. They could wait. If 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks of information comes in at once, that's from the state's perspective, legally and in terms of the reality, that's a spike. That's a spike in cases. That's a spike in deaths. And then invariably, oh, look, there's a spike. And it would coincide with the announcement of a new lockdown measure that's going to go in place. Yeah. That spike didn't actually exist in the physical realm. It was actually a longer wavelength of material, but because it wasn't reported to them, and that's just like one state's version, California's like that. Each state has a slightly different approach to it. So all the data, the way it's collected, is highly manipulable. And these bureaucracies already know that. And none of us know that. And so that alone, it's like, how do you trust the data if there's no uniformity of it and there's no ability to speak about it? You can't, if you bring it up, then you must be some sort of crazy loon.
Well, I'll push back on that because I have a friend that works at the CDC in this department, and the hospital data, the county data, the state data, the multiple streams of data into different departments in the CDC are meant to keep the data from being manipulated when they reconcile all of it. So I certainly see your point, but I do want to just say, like, there's a reason for that, which is partly why I hated the idea of the Trump administration trying to centralize that whole data collection process.
Yeah, always a toss-up.
Because Trump, of course, trying to get a handle on this is going to make the numbers look better for his reelection. So all that withstanding, let's define a lockdown, because I think that I think that the term has kind of become a catch-all. I was always anti-lockdown, but I certainly amended my behavior for a few months just to kind of keep myself safe, keep my family safe. But like sheltering in place, staying home, whatever you want to call it, voluntarily staying home, I think is different than a lockdown.
Yeah.
What does a lockdown mean to you, and what does it entail?
It's an interesting question. I mean, because it's sort of, I guess I have two minds of it. They're sort of like, well, what's a lockdown really represent? Are they just basically trying to create a de facto gulag? You're turning your home into your own prison. I mean, there's that aspect of it. Now, if there was, say, a truly virulent plague of some sort that was like really, 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 like, if you go outside and you interact with people and you're contagious and it quite very invariably leads to a lot of deaths, I see it as an extreme measure that the state needs to take for the preservation of a majority of lives. That would be an extreme measure that was sort of clear and present, that I believe, where they're effectively turning everyone's homes into a safe haven on one side of the coin and a bit of a prison or a gulag on the other side of the coin. And then they know, and it's understood that there's an evil there, but there's sort of an understood, there's sort of a decision has to be made at the highest level that it's for the greater good.
Like Washington used to do that in the beginning with yellow fever. He'd clear DC, or he'd force everybody to stay home. Yeah, because it was an immediate threat.
And it's what, and if we, thankfully this wasn't that, but they played it as if it was that. And then there's that added factor of like, once they're like, hey, we've gotten these people used to staying home and doing what they're told, let's maintain that. Like, a lockdown is a temporary measure put in place, utilizing the enforcement strength of the government for a temporary policy to protect the population from an acute need, which then ends.
Right.
Right. And people are then released. And that is what I feel like that's what a lockdown is. And then what these lockdowns are pretending to be, I feel, is a condition to all of us getting used to being told what to do, a type of gulag, where we're basically imprisoned in our own homes, or imprisoned in our own homes, and then they've able to basically outsource that to these to get the jab, and now they're creating these two citizenries of those who've had the jab and those who've have not.
How do you deal with regional differences? I mean, this has been kind of within We Are Libertarians, we've had a lot of debates about this, because I'm from Indiana. Like, everything was back to normal July 4th, 2020. We had a period where you couldn't go to bars, you couldn't go to a restaurant for like a month. You couldn't go to a gym. Like the gyms, I don't think ever really totally shut down except for maybe a month. you basically what you had, if you were in Indianapolis, the mayor would try to frustrate you to keep you home because you couldn't ever predict what hours anything would be open. But the rest of the state, like you go to Newcastle, Indiana, there's no lockdowns in Newcastle, Indiana. So that's been one of the struggles here, like within our group, because like I got tired of hearing Brian Nichols talk about how bad it was in Philadelphia and downtown Philly. I'm like, then move. Like, why, you know, you're from LA. Like, when I hear gulag, I kind of think like back to Easter, and I'm driving to my in-laws' house and I look at Bob Evans, and the line is like 40 people deep outside of Bob Evans to pick up a pie. And I'm like, okay, nobody's taking this seriously. This is all kind of BS. You know, once we get to the George Floyd riots, you're like, oh, you don't need to actually socially distance if it's to protest an injustice. I'm like, then y'all are not serious about this. So like, how do you deal with that? Whereas like, if you're in LA, I mean, you tell us what it was like in LA. It's much different in California, where do you still have restrictions there? I mean, you know, and then if you're in Australia, Australia's
I was
a whole
going to say,
different
those
story.
are the two things I'd say. Well, to your point, I did move.
Good.
I've removed my person, my business, my treasure from the state of California.
Excellent.
And I have severed those ties. It was time. I saw it coming, and I mean, talk about the internal artist sort of inner monologue, the inner dialogue. It was like, you need to go. It's time. You know, I mean, it was like, you don't have to run to the border, but you need to do the 150 things you need to do to like shut down your life, shut down your business, make your dues, and then go to where you were, living a freer life.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how, because so much of the anti-lockdown content that I've seen, I'm just kind of like, this seems a little hysterical. An author,
but you brought up Australia.
But if you're in Australia, you have a totally different perspective. How do you, as a storyteller,
even there, it's Victoria specifically, Victoria and Queensland, like Western Australia is wide open. It's totally free in Western Australia. Victoria is the one that has the history of authoritarianism, and they are literally a gulag. Like you have to stay within 2 miles of your home. And then, I mean, I'm sure you saw it where it was like the Fauci equivalent was like, now I understand you might go outside and you might, go see your neighbor as you go to the market, which is the one place you're allowed to go. But this is not the time to speak to them. Like they're terrified of people speaking to each other because I think they know that human networks and people calling BS on all this is going to be their downfall. And it still will be. But that has become a de facto gulag, all in the name of public health, all in the name of a lockdown that could be righteously brought forth, perhaps. I mean, I know in the libertarian world, like there'd be a lot of debate on that, but that being the extreme measure, and this did not rise to that. And they hyped it up, but Australia went there, and you get this sense that that's lurking in the shadows for all of us. And then the making the point about there's people who aren't experiencing that regional differences where it's wide open. I keep where I spend most of my time is where it is not happening. I don't wear a mask almost ever. I don't have to even talk about it. It's sort of like people go about their lives, engage in free commerce and free association. And I exercise my right to be freely disassociate from California.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to wear a mask once when I went to the library in the last 2 months. So I guess my question is like, how as a storyteller do you connect with so many different experiences through this? And tell that story to somebody who may be like, oh, okay, that seems like over the top and conspiratorial, I guess.
Sure. And I mean, the thing about wisdom, experience, so there's sort of like, there's like the knowledge you can have about something, then there's your emotional experience, the emotions that you that occur when you go through an experience. And I'm a big believer that those come together, knowledge and experience, or knowledge and emotions come together and form wisdom. And that's a threshold. You pass through a threshold. And now each and every one of us individually have an utterly unique experience. The details are totally unique to us, just like we were talking about at the beginning. But that emotional threshold that they go through when you grow up, I mean, all the things that you go through at just growing up as becoming a kid to an adult, all this movies are all about those coming of age stories. Well, coming of age is a series of emotional thresholds that people go through. All of us experienced very similar emotional thresholds. And so we look at all the different, that we focus on the thresholds. What were the thresholds that people experienced? So then when anyone watches it, even though they might be in probably a different world, there'll be a part of it that resonates with them. It's like, oh yeah, Ira, when I went through that, I experienced it this way, and expressing, and putting, validating bringing them in so they don't feel alone, validating their experience, but also letting them see that, oh, it was a universal experience. And so those types of thresholds are what we want to look at for each topic. What was it like to, what's a good example? I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I mean, there's been no chance to actually stop and look back, right? Every week there's like the latest crises. It keeps our frontal lobes occupied. But I mean, there was the flatten the curve, the lockdowns, the overloading of hospitals, the respirators, all these things that caused us a sense of fear. And then when they became inopportune, they just kind of got dropped, never to be spoken of again. And we want to go back and like, hey, remember when you were scared of that and you were terrified of this, or there was the respirator issue in your immediate family? We want to tell that story so anyone who had a relation, who has something that can relate to it, like, oh yeah, that was our version of that story was this. And our fear was like what came from this perspective, and because our existing knowledge at the time was this. And we want to go back and say, well, it's interesting that was your experience, but were you aware that the actual story, the actual data at the time versus what we were told was this? And so perhaps some of that was needless, or some of that was being manipulated. And perhaps those stories, I mean, this is where we want to get into, perhaps some of the information presented was presented in a way to manipulate you to feel a certain way and have a certain experience, rather than do what was best for you and your family. And we want to kind of compare and contrast those, focus on the thresholds, and kind of look for those universal experiences.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, there's there's those first little signs where you see the anti-lockdown rallies, and I drove through it. I just wanted to see like who was there, what was going on, and I'm like, this is a bad idea. Like if you're the anti-lockdown protesters in April holding a rally and one of those people dies, you're going to end up front page news. It's going to make you become a propaganda piece. It's a terrible idea. Yeah. Nobody got sick. Nothing happened. George Floyd, all those, you didn't see any spikes from the Floyd rally. The Indy 500 that I went to, nothing happened. You just have all these little benchmarks where you kind of go, you don't need to be so afraid of this. Like, and what's interesting now is that we're at a point where you have the vaccine. You have dropping rates in terms of death. Specifically, we had this spike up to 7,000 cases a day in Indiana, but the deaths didn't change. And people seem to be more afraid now after the vaccine than they were even a year ago, which what do you attribute that to, Hawk?
I'll go deep on that one. I feel the thing about what's been presented is there's I think the primary narrative coming from the policymakers, coming from the regurgitating mainstream media, is not authentic. It's not true. They're sculpting a narrative off of flimsy evidence. Now, these people are hearing it over and over again. As I like to say, there's a trifecta, say, of the New York Times, NPR, and CNN, and so they hear it over and over again. So out of sheer repetition, out of like the nature of sort of advertising technique, it becomes reality because they hear it over and over again, and then they tend to regurgitate it. It becomes a reality. I think that deep down, somewhere centrally in their being, in their rational mind or their spiritual mind, whatever modality you want to think about it, but that sort of centered sort of human spirit knows it's not true. Knows there's something that's not quite right. There's a little bit of their critical mind that's like, it's not quite there. And the more they get drawn along this narrative, and the more ridiculous and absurd it becomes, the more they actually know it's not correct. So it comes up as frustration and anger, which technically is at themselves because they're not listening to their own sort of critical thinking and their own doubting self. But it turns into this projection of fear, and that projection of fear then becomes anger, and then they're like, oh yeah, I don't care. Let these guys who are not getting vaccines die, and it's like, wow, that's dark,
psychotic,
it's like
sociopathic,
psychotic,
horrible.
Yeah. And they're like, and we're the reasonable science following blah blah blah.
Love is love. Let these people die.
Yeah, exactly. Unconditional love. Let them die. And it's this very strange, bizarre, absurdist, Orwellian. Doesn't make any sense. And we stand back and there's a whole. This I'll kind of segue a little bit to where I'd be hopeful. I think there's so many people like that doesn't make any sense. And that first threshold of the awakening of the individual is like what they're telling me versus what I'm observing personally does not compute. And that there's a little short circuit. And if they think that doesn't make any sense, that's the beginning of their critical thinking reawakening, or them listening to it. And I think the next big threshold after that is when you then decide to say it out loud to somebody, express it. Like, you might take you a few days, it might take you a few years. Be like, hey, and you got to pick who you're going to say it to. Like, I noticed something that's not quite correct, and I'm going to say it out loud now. And that's a bold, courageous thing to do. Most closed societies, if you look at like North Korea, all of their propaganda is designed to capture someone the moment they doubt the government, to like your parent or your friend. Like, hey, everybody, just remember, if you hear your parents say anything bad about the government, let us know, because we're more important. And it's all about capturing that. The statist, oppressionist, jackbooted thugs are terrified of self-expression. And I think that is what to get back to your question, the anger, I think, is people, they're denying their own self. They're denying listening to their own inner rational or spiritual center, whatever you want to call it. And they're so frustrated with themselves, it's been weaponized into anger against other. And we happen to be of the other camp. Yeah, I mean, there's something fascinating in terms of pride here. Where people, and I'm Mr. Both Sides guy. I mean, I have friends who were just sure this was all a hoax. It was a new world order conspiracy. They have never really thought it's real. It was not real until their immune system was going to fight it off, and then get it. And like, I don't have it. Like, what? You can't get out of bed. Like, it's not like the whole is it COVID or allergies game doesn't exist. Like, for a lot of people now with Delta, if you get it, you're gonna know it. I mean, it was a month-long recovery for me this last time. Oh yeah, it's miserable. It's horrible. I don't know if you've had it. Yeah, no. But like, they just can't admit that they got new information. And I've got on the other side friends and family who are just like, yes, I know that they have had COVID within the last month and have antibodies, but they're unvaccinated and I cannot be around them because I might get COVID even though I'm vaccinated. And you're just like, just admit that you may learn some new information. Like, there's just this stubborn pride. I don't know if this is, it's the weirdest psychological thing. And I think you've kind of nailed it with that, where it's just like, I have invested so much of my energy into this and being right about this over the last 18 months that if I admit that I might have been wrong about X, like, my identity is going to crumble. It's just like a really where, and I think that's a very small percentage of people. I think most people are kind of like, I don't want to get it. I don't want to go sit, I'm going to do some things. I'm going to get vaccinated. I don't want to get it, or I don't want to get back. Right. But like, they just kind of don't care and have moved on and don't want to talk about the pandemic. Like, this is over. We're moving on. You freaks sit over there and talk about it. One of the hardest things to do, I mean, people hate admitting they're wrong. Yeah. And so that's part of the reason with this series, like, we don't want to be like, we don't want to show like, hey, you're wrong. We feel like we have to tell an alternative story to lead people out. It's like saving face. I mean, saving face is a big part of the Eastern culture. I think it's a big part of our culture. We just don't talk about it. And it's just kind of used as a manipulative technique. Explain that. Saving face. Well, where kind of what you described was if you shove it in somebody's face that they're wrong, they kind of disassociate. Like, they don't want, you have to give people an out. You have to give them a story for a reason to be wrong. You have to be compassionate towards their emotions, because if you attack them, they'll shoot up their walls and their barriers and their internal protective mechanisms, which is what I would sort of describe what you just said. And you have to give people, I mean, compassion is the ability to find the language that speaks to the person in front of you. If you say, like, I'm saying the words that make sense to me and you should understand it, you're not giving them the pathway, like the story pathway to understand you. It's actually on you as the storyteller to find the words that make sense to them. And in terms of saving face, I mean, that's a complex sort of cultural phenomenon, but you have to, you need to let people come to their own emotional understanding as to why they were wrong, or why they need to adjust their belief system, and give them time to do that. If you sort of like, here are the facts and I have it in front of your face, because we all want that sort of like, we've been programmed by television and film, like, you know, the slapstick, here's the punchline, and now they know. That's not how life works. You know, it's just there's usually this very slow, deliberate sort of back and forth, and
there was a study
to integrate.
Yeah,
what they learned.
to briefly interrupt, there was a study that said a conversion to Christianity, an evangelistic study, said it took 30 conversations for a person to become a Christian. You know, I mean,
that's about right. Yeah,
I mean, that's maybe
30 stories. That means walking through the story,
right.
each one, like each a threshold, each an emotional place. Well, what about this? So these things that I wanted to know about, like, well, we think about it like that way. I was like, oh, okay. And then they have to a slow contemplation. And with the Witness Project, about the closed society dissidents. I mean, part of the argument was that there's sort of the thresholds, but the fifth threshold, it was basically, you know, the thinking for yourself, expressing it the first time, meeting the community around you. I mean, it's very hero's journey, going through the ordeal, escaping the oppressive regime. But then with the benefit of time, wisdom comes. You know, a lot of it was people would kind of escape. Like I talked about a Cambodian fellow. You don't just show up to the United States. You know, you make it. You escape the regime. You're in exile. You've basically survived the ordeal. And then it's not like you're like, aha, freedom. I know what that is. Most of the people never even know what freedom was. And it takes them 20 years to like live a life of freedom, get a stable environment going, an emotional state, a familial state, an economic state, live it for a while. And then one day it's like clicks. And they're like, oh, I understand what I was living under when I was a bird in a cage under the thumb of an oppressive regime. And now I know how to articulate it. And it takes them 20 years to get there. You know, it's not everybody wants this like instantaneous, oh, what did you learn? It's like, you got to let people figure it out. And so the idea of saving face is like telling stories and or at least how to create new cultural literacy is more of kind of a step towards that, is giving people each of those phases where here's a little thing to think about. Here's some knowledge. Here's a bit of an emotional experience. We want that to go into your mind and let you experience the wisdom that comes with it. You know, we'll describe it, we'll help define that, and then we'll move on to the next topic. But like, you know, not assuming everyone knows everything, and being as gentle as possible, compassionate, and yet hard hitting with the facts as well. You want to kind of like, and not ignoring the shadows, and not ignoring the stuff like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. It's an interesting dilemma. Just one little side note I want to add is, I mean, the biggest problem, you know, as a guy who goes around collecting stories from people who have historically significant stories to share and that kind of stuff, one of the first things I have to do is convince them that their story is worthwhile, because most of the people around them is like, why remember the past? The main attitude towards history by most cultures is, why would you want to remember the past? And that's kind of that's a norm for the human species across many nations, many cultures. I've noticed this. And so it's like, as a storyteller, that's part of the reason I want to do Follow the Science on Lockdowns and Liberty. I just want to capture historically what happened and have it on the record.
Yeah.
And my experience and all the experience of the people I speak to, they all have fabulous stories. They're all valid. Everyone listening, their stories are valid. Digital, you know, the details are unique to them. So it's utterly unique to them, and a fabulous, unique story to them. And yet the thresholds and the universality of experience is something worth capturing, comparing and contrasting. And from that, we can learn and hopefully move forward properly.
I think I love it, because I've maintained the whole time, like, the reason 9/11 still impacts us is because of the stories. We deeply connect with, you know, I'll never forget spring break, senior year, standing in front of the fence near Ground Zero with all the stories on the fence of, you know, like, I remember just weeping at darts.
Yeah.
And a guy, you know, they played darts with their friend and have one round on us in heaven. Like, I mean, it still like brings up this emotion now, 20 years later. Yes. And the thing about the pandemic is that stories were never told. It's all been facts and figures and, you know, are not values. And it just doesn't mean anything to people. People don't connect to it. And both sides have just tried to throw like their own facts at this. And it's, you know, the first time I saw stories around the pandemic was Spike Lee's documentary on HBO. The 9/11 documentary. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like,
I have not.
It's 2 hours about the pandemic in New York City. And it's nobody's talking down to anybody. it's literally just like paramedics talking about every 5 minutes getting a cardiac arrest call, and doctors talking about how they didn't have enough of this and that, and like hearing firsthand accounts and seeing the emotion and hearing the story. You're like, I just gained such a new perspective on what happened, because I've kind of become hardened to it. It's like you just sort of, if you check out of it and you start taking your own personal experience as this is the reality, and you don't know anybody that died from this, and you don't see anybody that's, you're in a place that had spikes and was, chastised for being terrible, but like things are pretty okay here, and life is back to normal, and you got to see a different perspective in New York City, where A, the media is based, B, but it just gave me a different perspective on it. And I think, the stories of small business owners have touched me. We talked to Jeff Bennett, who runs an ice cream shop in California. And the way that Fresno has completely screwed with his business, I mean, it pulls at your heartstrings, to the point that one of our listeners flew from Minneapolis down to Fresno to hold a corporate event there to support him. So stories just are incredibly powerful. And I think we one of the reasons we're so disconnected around the pandemic is that it's not based in story. It's based in easily falsifiable or non-falsifiable facts that can be perverted.
Yeah, and with little regard for the unintended consequences of what's being decided off of those abstract numbers. And it's hard, because I'll check out that documentary, the Spike Lee documentary. I mean, because it is the sort of thing where, like, there was a big spike of sorrow, of travesty in New York City, and then looking at that, and like does everyone in New York City now though think that that's what everyone else experienced? So anyone who thinks opposite must be crazy. And so it's this interesting sort of trying to find those middle grounds, and plus trying to understand, like, well, did New York go that route because it's such a dense population of people? It's actually a very mismanaged city, and they weren't geared to handle something like this, and they could have been, but why didn't they? It opens all kinds of questions as to what could have been. And I helped a lot of friends. I had friends who were stuck there, and people helped. It was hard. Remember, you weren't supposed to travel, so you had to do an act of civil disobedience to kind of help people get to other parts of the country at a certain point, which was just surreal. And even though we were all kind of free to do it, and no one was getting pulled over, it was just kind of this odd. You could feel sort of the control of the government, like saying, "You can't do that," and it's like, "No, I'm going to go do this because I have that right."
Everybody has those benchmarks, like you said. Like the first time you put on a mask, you felt awkward and weird, like you were being judged. The first time you took it off, you felt like you were doing something wrong. Or
the first time you walked in somewhere being one of the persons not wearing a mask, and everyone looked at you, and you felt the shaming and the shunning.
And my fiance looked at me and goes, "You're not going to wear a mask?" I go, "This is over. We're done with this. If we don't take this off now, we're now, you got to be the asshole, because if you're not."
Totally. And we just did an interview with Angela Marsden. She's the one who had that viral video where she had the restaurant and she filmed it, and she had put all this money and investment into an outdoor patio, but they started out, there was the lockdown showed up and they locked that down as well. And then she goes to her restaurant, stops by for some reason, and there is a giant feature film movie set in Los Angeles, like North Hollywood or something, and a huge tent right next to her thing, and that was okay. And she just turned on the video and just let loose at how unfair this was, and how crazy this was, and how absurdist this was. And one of the things I have done, and you've actually already answered the question, was I've asked everyone. We've been talking to scientists and doctors, but everyday people, and I always ask everyone though. I'd ask this. I just talked to Dr. Peter McAuliffe, and we just talked to Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. David Katz, and then people like restaurant owners. They got that guy named Matt Brimijan in California. But I ask all of them, what was the first moment that you heard of COVID, or more importantly, when did you realize it was something you'd have to take seriously? And you just it's I think you just kind of got at that, where that's one of those real moments. It's sort of the 9/11 moment of, oh, I can't just carry on my life the way I used to. There's this slow moving paradigm shift. Do you recall that? I mean, you talked about the documentary. What was your version of that?
So my version of it was a work event. so I work for a radio show, and we were going to have an event in Louisville or Lexington or somewhere, with a lot of money tied to it. And, we had long conversations about whether or not we should have that. And the bottom line was just, we don't know. And if we have this event and somebody gets hurt or God forbid dies, like, I don't want that on my conscience. Like, if we don't know, I mean, for me, it was just, I'm not a doctor. I'm a dumbass. That's why I do this show, is so I can talk to smart people who think about these things, who kind of understand stuff. Like,
You're a curious man.
Yeah, I'm curious. I need to think about, like, I need information. I need to know what's going on. Let's wait this out to figure this out. And it was we took a lot of heat. Oh, you're canceling this over a hoax, but it was the right call, because like the NCAA losing billions of dollars, it wasn't about, there was no insurance money. It cost everybody a lot. I mean, but it was the right call. It's like Jeff Bennett at the ice cream store in California. I go, so what do you do? Oh, safety for our employees is a top concern. We want, we can do whatever we want now, and we have these protocols. It's like the local Chick-fil-A bringing in IU Health to figure out how to best protect their employees. Like, the idea that everybody was just going to be reckless and be unsafe and actively, have COVID parties like chickenpox was just nonsense. Every business owner that I talk to, long conversations with my cousin Matt, who runs a lawn care center. What do I do? How do I keep my people safe? How do I keep my elderly customers safe? That was the top concern for everybody, and it remains that top concern. And like you said, we were all going to figure it out without the interjections in the marketplace making everything so much worse, inflating the currency. And it would have been so much less resentful, so much less angry, so much less political. We wouldn't, people have lost the ability to talk about this. They've lost the ability to talk about politics. And you want to know why Democrats can't figure out why they lost in an election yesterday, and Republicans don't really know why they won? Because none of them are talking to each other. So
it's all talking past each other, for sure.
Voluntary exchange just brings about the muscles of social fabric, whereas
well said.
Easily going to force and pushing your agenda onto people breeds social resentment and this kind of chaos. And so I just think that's the thing that I take away from this pandemic, is that there's, like that documentary, like I've experienced in my life, there's a lot of empathy that people have for others, even that people they don't agree with. And the second you wedge the government in between it, it just breeds that anger, that resentment, that hatred. And I hope that we walk away from this going, what were we thinking? Like, just going for the quick, easy route, forcing everybody into their homes, forcing vaccines into them. And,
well, and even just, and I'll jump in there, just saying, like, it's like reclaiming our humanity. I mean, like, everyone's so risk averse. I mean, this was not I'll say too, like, for everyone who lost a loved one to COVID, like, deepest sympathies and sorrow and compassion for that. I mean, it has been difficult to see this occur and have the susceptible and those who fell victim to it, lose their lives or become deeply disabled by it. Terrible. But it is a, due respect, but it is a manageable risk that we can assess, that in the great scheme of things, it's like we still get out and get in our cars and run the risk of having the car accidents. We still go out and there's all kinds of other diseases and other ailments and other accidents awaiting us. And just like a relationship to our humanity in terms of, we have an immune system, but the only thing certain in life is death and taxes. We're all going to die someday. And having a relationship to it and being able to discuss it openly and to your point of just, people have just really lost the ability to hear each other and share their own human experiences, and then to decide what is a safe amount of risk to engage in living life to its fullest. Like, we all just, ultimately, this project, and the reason I'm doing this is I want everyone, for like everywhere I've ever been and everyone I've ever met, to relearn what it is to live life to its fullest. And I feel like that's our journey back to, not, I don't want to call it normalcy or what life was like before, but the new paradigm that I think that we're heading towards in a good way. Once we get through all this sort of bureaucratic nonsense that we're all going through, I do feel there's a chance that a lot of people are waking up. A lot of people are making choices for themselves, that they realize they have to make choices for themselves, that the world's difficult, but the human experience, the human condition is to make choices and move forward to better yourself, to better your family, to better your environment, to better your community. And I just feel like we're in a good, I think we're going to get there. And I hope Follow the Science on Lockdowns and Liberty is just one cog in the kind of establishing that cultural literacy for everyone to get there together.
Yeah, I mean, my mom is a nurse, and 40-year nurse. And I hate the people who make fun of the TikTok nurses, because they have no idea how many Christmases and Thanksgivings and birthdays my mom missed this past year.
Yeah,
because she was exposed to COVID, or how hard it's been for her. I mean, but at the same time, like, we literally thought we were just saying goodbye to her, like, and so there came a point kind of, in the middle of the year where we're like, all right, she's going to be fine. This is not as bad as we thought, having those conversations helped us, and
the fear is real. And like that emotion is completely valid. Even if even if perhaps it was, the narrative made it more fearful than you need be, you experienced it as if it was real. So therefore your emotions were totally real. And now that's part of you. That's part of you and your family. Like, you've had that experience, and you want to make sure, you want to make sense of it and understand how it fits around you. It's like, at no point, it's always very important. Everyone's experience is valid. It's their, I like to return to that, because it also is about the individual experience. I mean, to go through that, these nurses and doctors who went in and worked on this stuff when they didn't know, when it was unknown.
9 Italian doctors had died like the month before it hit. Like, we were just
bravery.
We were just sure that they. I mean,
it's absolutely worth celebrating. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I've really cut back on memes, which sounds like a really ridiculous thing to say, but that specifically kind of taught me, like, is mocking other people really helping? Because it isn't, and like, if you have an unvaccinated friend and you're hardcore like, go and talk to them, because you're going to be amazed at how many blood diseases you didn't know about, how many complications their doctor has advised against because they shouldn't get the shot. Like, the asking instead of judging or mocking is so much more powerful, because you learn something about your loved one or friend that they had been hiding from you. Because they didn't want to burden you, and we that's something that I've learned, like, all right, why are you not wanting to do this? Well, because of these things. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. How can I help? I think that's got to be just a core part of moving forward, is just stopping asking the question, trying to connect with someone on a vulnerable level, as opposed to just trying to shove them in the box, trying to put them. I'm sure people that downloaded this are like, well, I'm waiting to see what Hawk's bias is. Is he a crazy person who just is a hoaxer, anti-vaxxer, trying to get on the old Mercola train? But I appreciate your time, and I think this has been a great conversation, and I can't wait to see the documentary. How long do I have to wait?
Well, we just we're pivoting now to production. Well, we've been in production. We've done about 40 interviews, but we're as part of our development process. But we are going full on into getting the pilot done. We'll probably have something towards the end of February, March in terms of release. And we got some more. We're going to do some travel, get some sit down interviews. We got some talent we're negotiating with right now. Just finished a sit down interview with Nick Hudson in South Africa, so that went really well. We're working on the pilot, and then the overall series we'll be spending the next year on working on it. So look for something in the first quarter of 2022.
And if you want to help contribute, you go to followthesciencefilm.com. Congratulations on hitting 200,000 for making this.
Yeah, we're humbled and thrilled. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, I think people need to understand that it takes money to put something like this together. Creative work is work. It takes work, and it takes capital. Sometimes people go, oh, everybody's starting a podcast or doing a film or something about this controversial topic because they're grifters, which,
sure, yeah.
Defend creative work, please, so people understand what resources it takes to make something like this.
Sure. Well, it's a collective art form. I mean, it is. We're all professional filmmakers. We've been doing it for years, and what we want to make something at basically as high a professional level as possible. We want to be good enough to be on the main distribution models. We have a strategy there. And plus people respond to production value. I mean, you show these people in a certain way, and that's just the nature of major feature film cinema. Sort of gives people that they're able to project themselves into the world. If you can get people to project, suspend their disbelief, become part of the world you create for them, they internalize that and becomes part of their being. So that's what production value attains, and that's what we're going for. We feel that going for a cinematic quality documentary, docuseries that brings you into this world of understanding, we think will have a greater effect. And so that being the case, we're actually, our first phase is a $300,000 fundraise, but the overall series will be about $1.5 million. And the your average Netflix documentary costs like $1.5 million per episode. So we're actually, we figured out like our bottom dollar, cheapest way we feel we could make it, and yet attain the look and feel that we feel will put us on the swinging for the fences. So we really appreciate everyone who's donated so far, and if anyone wants to donate, we greatly appreciate it. And and for me, fundamentally, it's to demonstrate what it is for me, self-expression. In terms of my bias, I believe self-expression, the act of expression, the ability for the individual to express themselves, to think of an idea that somewhere, and there's this ethereal plane where you think of something and you bring it in and you say it out loud. That is the driving force, the transcendent driving force of the entire human experiment. And that's my bias, is that I believe freedom, that expression, self-expression, freedom of expression is fundamental to everything. So that's everything I say is through that filter.
Too bad Hollywood's going to cancel you.
Oh yeah, what? It's all right. Hollywood's over. It's in its twilight, just like journalism, old world journalism. It's now everywhere. I mean, here we are having this wonderful conversation through modern technology, wonderful production values in and of itself. So it's things are changing.
I had that conversation today, around an old school medium. And I just said, look, you need to understand, production value has never been cheaper to attain. There is an entire generation of people who are voting and serving overseas and having children who have had a camera in their hand the whole time. Like, you need to understand that this is not 1997 anymore. Like, you can make a movie, a radio show, a documentary, or whatever for cheap. So you've got to be more creative. I mean, the old model of content creation where you have to go hat in hand. I'd love for people to go listen to your podcast with Zuby, because you talk a lot about Hollywood, where you had to toe their line. You don't have to do that anymore.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that, the whole production value thing's interesting. I mean, like with Witness Project, what I wanted to do was create the hero myth. I was like, they're basically little feature films about these a star in the Hollywood sense is an actor pretending to be a hero, and you put all the production value, and then they like, oh wow, but these are actual people who actually stood up and started to express themselves in the face of oppression. They're actual stars, whatever, however you want to assign it, like people who have that energy to like put that energy out. And I was like, yeah, if we put the right production value around them, where you show them, people respond to that. There's a reason the leader or the king had that stately room and the throne, and it's gilded and you're up higher. All these little things matter, and you realize, oh, this person's important, or this person has some sort of direct connection to something higher than myself. All these psychological control mechanisms that you can see time and time again, you can reflect them in production value. You can show like, this person is worth listening to because we've put this effort. You have, with a proper film, say you have 25 people on set, those are 25 creatives, different types of artists with different specialties, all pouring their energy into making that one person look amazing, so that they then can present their information. And then that person feels like, wow, 25 people if sometimes 50 are doing this, and they realize like now is the time for me to really speak my truth, and they speak the truth over my shoulder as a camera, which is like a time machine. It captures that perfect moment, that perfect bit of light. Then we do a whole bunch of work on it in post-production to make it that much more beautiful, bring in all the other like music and all that kind of stuff, and we have this presentation of truth that is authentic and rivals the narrative. You have like, we like stories and narrative film and all that kind of stuff, but I like to bring cinematic quality to documentaries, because that way here's a really true piece of wisdom being shared with humanity that we can all learn from, and not necessarily have to experience ourselves if that story's told properly. So we really pour ourselves into making high quality documentaries, high quality stories with the necessary support squad. So that's why it sounds like a lot of money, and yet it's not a lot of money, and it's like that kind of,
it's not at all. I can tell you working in SoundMind Creative Group, go support them, follow thesciencefilm.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We just ask that everybody go support your work. And I mean, if you want good content that tells the truth, you've got to support it. So make sure you go check out followthesciencefilm.com. Hawk, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. It was really great being here. I'm glad you're feeling better from being under the weather, and it was a great conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.